This is the attendant data form. This is where the attendant will put all of their information. And then at the bottom, this is where the employer of record will put their information as well as the information of the consumer. So scrolling up, let's list off everything we need. And I'm using some fake names, some test names, just as an example so you can see what the form looks like when it's all filled out. So the caregiver will put their first name, middle name if it applies, and the last name. We have to have an address. If the physical address and the mailing address are the same, you can go on ahead and leave the mailing address blank. We have to have a physical address. And of course, if the mailing address is different, then you'll go on ahead and put that as well. We have to have a phone number. We have to have an email address. You'll need it for portal registration. We'll need the attendant's date of birth and social security number. Please keep in mind that in order to be an attendant, you have to have a valid social security number. Moving down, you'll see these two checkboxes right here. So there are some cases where the consumer will be the caregiver's child and they will be a minor under the age of 18, or the consumer will be the caregiver's spouse. So if the caregiver marks yes to either of these, this will be considered an Appendix K case, or as we like to say, a COVID packet. So if the attendant marks yes to one of these checkboxes, the packet has to be submitted through DocuSign so we can keep track of it. Moving on down. So this is the employer information. We have to have the first name of the employer, the phone number for the employer email address, the name of the consumer Medicaid ID, and the age of the consumer. This is important because this will determine whether or not we need a Department of Social Services form. So if the consumer is 18 years or older, we don't need one of those forms, but if they happen to be a minor under the age of 18, we will need to have the Department of Social Services form. And scrolling down to the bottom, we need the attendant signature and date, and we'll need the employer of record signature and the date as well. And that's the attendant data form. This is the payroll tax exemptions determination. So this is the form that basically determines the relationship between the attendant and the employer of record. So up here, we have to have all of our names printed, the attendant name, the employer of record name, and the name of the consumer. So scrolling down here, you'll see quite a few options. So the caregiver or the attendant will have to select one of these to determine their relationship to the employer of record. So the first one says, I am the spouse of the employer. The second one says, I am the parent of the employer. If the caregiver selects this one, they can select any of these boxes that happen to apply to them. I am the child of the employer. So if the caregiver selects I am the child of the employer, they have to select one of these boxes to determine their age. And if the caregiver and the employer of record are not related or their relationship is not described above, all they have to do is fill out this last one. I just filled out the last box as an example. And moving down to the bottom, the attendant's signature is required as well as the date, and the employer of record signature is required as well as the date. So this is the attendant consumer live-in determination. Basically, this form tells us whether or not the caregiver lives with the consumer. So of course, with a lot of these forms, you have to have the attendant name, the employer of record name, and the consumer name. Once you scroll down here, you'll see a few options. The caregiver has to select one of these options to determine live-in status. If they choose option number 1, this means that they live with the client and they're eligible for certain benefits. If they select option 1 saying that they are a live-in, they have to select either yes or no to this option right here. And that basically is, I attest that I qualify for the IRS difficulty of care income tax exclusion. So they'll say either yes or no to whether or not that does apply to them. In addition to these, the caregiver will also have to supply proof of address. They basically have to prove that they do live with the client. That can be a driver's license, a voter registration card, it could be a utility bill, a bank statement, something that has the caregiver's physical address on it. If the caregiver only temporarily lives with the client, they will select option 2, I live temporarily, but for extended periods with the consumer. This option does not require proof of address. And the third option, of course, is I live at a separate residence than the consumer. And obviously, of course, we do not need proof of residence for this. Just scrolling down, of course, for a lot of these forms, we will also need the attendant's signature, we'll need the date, and the employer of record signature, as well as the date. Now, this form might look familiar to you. This is an I-9 form, a federal form that both the caregiver and the EOR will fill out. The first page is pretty straightforward. The caregiver will put their last name, first name, middle initial, if that applies, the address, and your identifiers, the date of birth, the social security number, email address, if that applies, and the employee's telephone number. So scrolling down just a little bit more, the caregiver will determine their citizenship status by selecting one of these boxes here. We'll need a signature and a date from the caregiver. And of course, down here, they can tell us whether or not they used a translator to fill out this form. So scrolling down to the second page, the I-9 is 2 pages long. This is where the employer of record will fill out their information. The employer of record has to basically verify the caregiver's identity. So the caregiver will supply either a List A document or they will supply 2 documents, List B and C. And let me scroll down here really quick. If you need any help determining what is a List A document or what qualifies as a List B and C document, you can just use this form right down here and it'll tell you exactly what you need. A List A document, you just need one. Now, if you're doing a List B or C document, you have to have both. A lot of people will just supply like a driver's license or a social security card, birth certificate. It has to be one from each column. In this case, I went on ahead and put down a passport. That's just a List A document, so you only need one. So I just put passport, issuing authority, the US Postal Service. I just put a bunch of zeros for the document number and the expiration date. And just as a reminder, I'm only using some fake names, some test names, just as an example. So the caregiver's name will be here at the top, middle initial, and citizenship status. So scrolling down here, this is really important. We have to have the first day of hire. So just keep in mind when you do have the first day of hire, it cannot be over a year old. It has to be within the past year. The employer of record will sign, date, provide the title. They'll have their printed last name and first name, business or organization name. You can probably just put employer right here, and then the employer's address, and that's all you need. So here we are with the W-4 form. This is one of your tax forms. So we will need the most updated version of the W-4 since it happens to be 2022. We will use the 2022 version. We will need the caregiver's first name, last name, a valid social security number, the caregiver's address. We will have to have a marital status filled out. We will also need the caregiver's signature and their date. And if you want to fill out steps 2 through 4, fill those out only if it applies to you. But other than that, that's pretty much all we need for the W-4. So the next tax form we'll get to is the VA-4. So really the top sheet is for your reference. It's the worksheet. What we really need is the bottom half. Kind of the same thing with the W-4. We will need the social security number of the caregiver. We'll need the name, the street address, and then we'll get down to the withholding. Basically, whatever applies to you, we have to have something marked here. We have to either have something on 1C or 3 or 4. Two of them cannot be marked at the same time, but we at least have to have one. And just for your reference, just as an example, I put a 1 next to 1C, and we have to have a signature and a date. And that's all you need. So this is the pay selection form, basically the caregiver saying how they would like to be paid. So at the top, we have the name, we have the attendant's date of birth. Down here is where the caregiver will select actually how they want to receive their payment. They have the option of getting a Wisely pay card account, or we can do regular direct deposit. If you select direct deposit to an existing checking, savings, or pay card account, you'll have to fill in the information here. Say the bank name, which kind of account it is, and you'll have to supply some kind of a bank document. Usually people do like a voided check with their account number and their routing number on it. But if you just select the Wisely Pay Card account, one will be sent to you, so you don't have to provide any more information. And if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see where the caregiver has to sign and date the form. This is the employment agreement. It's pretty straightforward. It's 3 pages long. We have to have all 3 pages. And it pretty much says up here, this agreement is between the attendant and employer of record named above. It establishes the responsibilities of the parties to each other. So before signing this form, make sure both the caregiver and the employer of record read through all 3 pages and then sign. Just coming back up to the top here really quick. On the first page, we have to have the attendant name and the employer of record name. This is so we know who's signing and who's agreeing. Scrolling down, making sure that everything is read. And once both parties read through the entire document, they will print their names. We have the employer of record name here, attendant name printed. Both will sign and both will date their signatures. And that's all you need. This is the SP-167 or the Criminal History Record Name Search request. This is the caregiver giving us permission to submit the background check for them. It's pretty easy to fill out. You actually have to go have this notarized, but I'll get to that in just a second. At the top, we have to have the caregiver's last name, first name, middle name if it applies, maiden name if it applies. Race is optional. We have to have the sex, the date of birth, and the caregiver's social security number. Down here with the affidavit for release of information, this is where both the caregiver and the notary can fill it out. So you can get this notarized at a local bank. That's what a lot of people do. So the caregiver has to sign right here on the affidavit, and then the notary will do the rest. The notary will put all of their information, they'll sign it, and they'll fill out all the rest of the information here. Now, what you don't see on this form is a notary seal. That is something that the notary will actually stamp the form with, and that's something we do have to have for the form to be complete. And that's how you fill out the SP-167. Here is the Virginia Department of Social Services form, or the DSS form, as we like to call it. This is actually a form that needs to be mailed into our office so we can check over it and actually send it to the Department of Social Services. So keep that in mind when you're filling this form out. We will need the original copy of the form. The thing about the Department of Social Services, they really need some kind of an answer for everything on this form. Even if it doesn't apply to you, they still would like you to put not applicable, NA. But everything has to be filled out or have some kind of an answer. We'll need our address up here. This is the address for our office. The FIPS code. This is the code on every form we send out. We have to have the caregiver's last name, first name, and middle name. If the caregiver doesn't have a middle name, all you have to put is no middle name. Or if the caregiver's middle name just happens to be an initial, you can put the initial and then put initial only, and you'll see that in these instructions right up here. Maiden name only if it applies to you. And if you don't have a maiden name, you can put NA or not applicable. The sex of the caregiver. We have to have the date of birth of the caregiver. Race is optional. I'm just putting not applicable here. The driver's license number, I just put zeros just as an example. A valid social security number. Any other legal names you might have gone by. In this case, I'm putting not applicable. The current address of the caregiver and any prior addresses the caregiver has had. In this case, I'll just say that this caregiver has lived at this address for their entire life. That happens to be the case. You can just put not applicable. Let's move on down to marital status. If the caregiver has never been married, they will mark single and they will put not applicable in the boxes. They have to put not applicable if they have never been married. If they have been married or divorced, widowed, or partner, they have to put all of the information for that person. We have to have all current partners and all previous partners and all of the information that they have. List of children. If the caregiver doesn't have any children, all you have to put is not applicable. If the caregiver does have children, they will have to put all of the information for each child. The Department of Social Services, they like to be very thorough in their search. Scrolling down, the caregiver has to sign it. Now, I don't have this part filled out because this is what the notary will fill out. You can get this notarized at a local bank. All of this has to be filled out by the notary, and you'll see right here, it's a little faded here, but it says notary seal. This is where the notary will put their seal. And once everything is all filled out and notarized, you'll have a complete Department of Social Services form, and you can go on ahead and just mail that to our office.